This is Steve Marchand doing another episode of Substack Live. If you're listening to us live, thanks for jumping in. I see we have a group of folks ready to go. For those of you that are listening to the recorded version of this, thanks for finding us. You can find all the episodes of the Steve Marchand podcast where we deal with state, a little bit of local, some federal politics, and we take most of our Substack lives and we edit them a little bit and turn them into podcast episodes as well. But for those of you that are here live today, happy 2026. No rest for the weary. Over the weekend, it feels like a month's worth of news happened overseas with the Trump administration. I wrote some stuff about that today on my Substack at stevemarchand.com. We'll do some programming on that in the near future as well. But we spend most of our time on state politics. And this week is the beginning of the 2026 legislative session. There's a lot going on, so much that a lot of bills can get overlooked, I think, including some that are very directly related to the economy, which voters continue to tell us is overwhelmingly the number one issue. And so my good friend Kathy Staub, who is now I think I could say a veteran of the New Hampshire legislature, a career and an advocacy that extends way beyond her current status as a legislator. Kathy has been a champion for a long time on a number of topics, one of them being the minimum wage. And to start the year, this is a really important bill that's an important part of a broader discussion. And there was nobody better to bring on as we begin the new year with no change in New Hampshire's minimum wage yet again. Kathy knows this better than anybody in New Hampshire and has a bill designed to help do something about it. So we want to have Kathy on. Kathy Staub, state representative from Manchester, our friend and a real advocate for working folks. How you doing, Kathy?
I'm doing as good as well as could be expected. Yeah.
Well, it is a new session and Democrats not in the majority this year. That may change this November. I think there's a real opportunity for that in the House. But for now, there's a solid Republican majority in the House. But that doesn't mean that Democrats cannot raise the flag and try to make real progress on important issues. So you have done something this year and you all kinds of context. House Bill 1484, minimum wage related bill. You've got some great co-sponsors as well. Maybe tell us a little bit, take us at the start, tell a little bit about not just this bill, although it does specific things, but also we get to the place where New Hampshire is the only state in New England that has no state level minimum wage and is one of the only states in the entire Northeast U.S. that doesn't have a double-digit hourly minimum wage. How did we get here?
Well, the last person who signed a minimum wage bill in the state of New Hampshire was Governor Lynch. And that was around 2007, and it was a double step. And so in 2009, the state level minimum wage went to $7.25 an hour. And this was, there was a crisis, and in the Great Recession relief package that was done at the federal level, they raised the minimum wage to coincidentally $7.25 an hour, and that was in 2009. And then we had the Tea Party come through, and they had veto-proof majorities in the House and the Senate. We still had John Lynch as governor, so they put in a bill that would basically erase state-level minimum wage in New Hampshire in 2011. And of course, John Lynch vetoed that, but they were able to override it in the House and the Senate. So then it became law. So at that point, we've been trying to raise the minimum wage. Someone puts in a bill every year. The last 3 years, it's been me, but Chris Schultz and other people have put them in previously. Peter Schmidt had one in. One year there was like 3 different bills. But as long as we didn't have control, if we got control of the House and the Senate, we didn't have. We had a Republican governor who vetoed it, and we didn't have veto-proof majorities. So we did manage to pass something in 2019, which Governor Sununu vetoed. And he said it would kill small businesses. So we went back the following year in 2020 and put in another bill. And at that point, Governor Sununu said that it was the federal government's authority and responsibility to deal with the minimum wage. So Bernie Sanders and Pramila Jayapal and that group, they put in the Raise the Wage Act at the federal level. And to their credit, both Annie Kuster and Chris Pappas voted in favor of raising the minimum wage in the House. And then it went to the Senate, and then they were putting together the COVID relief package. And they were trying to get the minimum wage raise into that package the way that it had been done back at the time of the Great Recession. And the parliamentarians said, no, you can't do that. So, I mean, the Republicans ignore the parliamentarian. They have no problem with that. But there happen to be 8 Democrats who, oh, no, we can't possibly overrule the parliamentarian. And those people were usual suspects: Sinema, Manchin, Carper and Coons from Delaware, Angus King from Maine, John Tester from Montana, and of course, Maggie Hassan and Jeanne Shaheen. So the governor is telling us, no, it's the federal government's responsibility. And then I guess the federal level, our 2 senators say, no, we can't do that. No, because the parliamentarian says it's not a good thing to do. So the minimum wage remains at $7.25 an hour.
And has been, so doing that, it's been at $7.25 now for what, like 16 years or something?
Yeah, well, let's see, since 2009.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is
years.
the longest period that the minimum wage has been unaltered since it was first introduced in 1938. And a lot has changed since 2009.
A lot's changed since 2020, even, really, when you think about the purchasing power of what 725 means.
Yeah, for the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute just put something out that said, I have it somewhere here. A rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in 2013 in the state of New Hampshire was $1,076, and in 2024 it was $1,833. So housing has gone up exponentially, not exponentially, but actually it could have doubled since 2029.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's a big issue for people that have seen their rent go up at ridiculous rates. So,
well, and I mean, to that point, we've talked about in other episodes that if you look at what polling shows is described as the biggest problem facing New Hampshire, University of New Hampshire does this every month, every quarter or so. About 70% of people will say some combination of cost of living, cost of housing, see the pattern, healthcare, which they typically mean the cost of, thus lack of accessibility of healthcare, education and property taxes, which has an affordability element. All of this kind of swims back to how much I'm bringing in relative to how much needs to go out. And that ratio is not working out too well. And it's getting worse as you get down the income ladder.
Right.
And that is at an accelerating rate. So this is really relevant to what most people in New Hampshire are saying is the biggest problem they face in their household.
Right. Yeah. And, and when you think about this, the higher up the ladder it goes, the more dangerous it gets for the people in power. The MIT minimum wage calculator says that for a single person, you would need to make $24 and let's see, $24.78 for a single person who's trying to make ends meet in New Hampshire. For 2 adults with 1 child, it would be $25.09, and for 2 adults with 2 children, it would be $31.19. And the median wage in New Hampshire, meaning half of the 680,000 workers in the state make less than that, is $25.29. So you see, there are a lot of people who are not at that threshold where they can meet all of their expenses. And that's That's a problem. That really is a problem. And, and the minimum wage, if you're looking at things at a systematic level, is one of the tools that we have to get more money into the pockets of people who will then spend it in their community before it gets sucked up into the vortex that sends it all to the Walton family. Who the three scions of the Walton family are now worth $500 billion. It's not like
Well,
they're unloading the trucks or running the cash registers or stocking the shelves. They're not doing anything to get that money. Meanwhile, they're telling the people who work for them that they need to sign up for food stamps because they have no intention of paying them enough money that they can get both a roof over their head and enough to eat, much less pay for a car so they can get to the warehouse or the retail
well,
business.
I mean, one of the arguments, back, especially in COVID, when folks were largely stuck at home, and there was a talk, for example, universal basic income or refundable tax credits for children, different ways of getting at, I think, a similar concept, which for me, it was an exciting moment in public policy because there was this brief window where you had folks on the right in some think tanks, as well as most folks on the center left, all the way to the left, who were saying, if you want to get the maximum economic impact, direct public sector engagement or funding, when you go down the income scale,
Mhm.
every extra dollar that you put in the hands of somebody that's below that median income that you described a moment ago, the uh, an enormous percentage, nearly all of it, will very quickly go back into the economy,
Right.
the local economy, in some form, and that as you go up that income scale, additional money in the hands of somebody may or may not have other impacts, but one impact it does not have is that immediate stimulative effect that has a local ripple to it. And so
Right.
this is where I think one of the arguments for increases in the minimum wage is for folks that whose wage would be directly impacted by an increase. That extra dollar, $2, $5, whatever it ends up looking like, we know what happens to that money. Will be spent will be spent on the blocking and tackling of life, and it will be spent locally.
Right.
This is what people across the ideological spectrum, the vacuum, say is what they ideally would like to see do, because they know of its ripple effects, its positive ripple effects. But of course, this is not where a lot of state policy has been going lately, right? Tax cuts are not disproportionately going to the places where they would have that stimulative effect. They're going to the very top.
Right. Yeah. I mean, dividends and interest tax repeal is a perfect example of that. I mean, I think somebody was saying I think Andrew Walensky wrote something up about it, and the New Hampshire Fiscal Policy Institute was looking at where the money comes from. And I guess the first $96,000 that you get from dividends and interest are, and retirements and all that stuff are exempt. So it's people that are, sitting in their lake house who haven't, haven't worked in a while, or, their grandparents may have done something that made a lot of money, and they're just living. It's like a well, once you have that money, it just keeps flowing in. And I mean, how much of it can, I mean, how many $50 million weddings can Jeff Bezos have
Well,
in a
and I
year
mean,
or whatever? So the only way, like, it's a tornado and it just sucks all the money up to any wealth that's created at ground level just gets sucked up to the top. And how do you have capitalism when you've got like 8 people that have control of all the capital? I mean, if you're a small business owner, you've got a convenience store with a gas station, someone comes in and they get their gas. If they've got a little extra money in their pocket, they might buy coffee, and the other thing is that when you're looking at the people who are the lowest paid, people call, they should get a better job. Well, we need them. We need people to go to someone's home in the morning to help them get dressed so that we don't have to pay for them to be in a nursing home, and they get to stay in their home and live in their community. So those are, and I'm looking at who the lowest, we've got like 58, there's 58,000 people in the workforce who work in food prep, and the average starting salary there is $12.25 an hour. And I know we all hear these, anecdotal stories about, oh, my neighbor's cousin's hairdresser's stepdaughter makes $16 an hour working at McDonald's. Well, that's nice, but when they're 25 or they in 26 and they're looking for their own apartment, or maybe they want to buy, are they still going to be making 16 or $17,000 an hour, which is not enough to live on? It's not enough to isn't barely enough to survive if you're continuing to live at home, which they probably don't want to do, but it's not enough to get out on your own and start your own life. So, another group of retail, 20,000 people in the state work at retail, and the starting salary, average starting salary there is $13.56 an hour. Janitors, there's close to 9,000 of those folks. They make $14.72 an hour. And ironically, a lot of these people were considered essential workers, like the cashiers in
Sure.
grocery stores, 19,000 of them making a starting salary of $12.69 an hour. And I remember during the COVID lockdown, going to the grocery store, those people had no choice. A lot of the older people, people who look like me, who had been baggers, they just said, I'm staying home. I can't risk getting sick.
Well, that was high risk at that moment.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
very high risk, but people needed to eat. People needed food. And so, and these are some of the lowest paid people. I mean, I need to eat. I mean, you think about what human beings need. You need food, you need shelter, you need water. And if you get sick, you need to be able to go to the doctor. So the people that were cleaning the hospitals, the people that were preparing food in the nursing homes, these are some of our lowest paid workers. And we had all these signs that said essential workers deserve a wage, a wage raised. And so that was the messaging that we used then. And that was when, we did pass minimum wage bills that Chris Sununu, the moderate, even though Stiles Bridges was the first person, a Republican, and Governor Wynot, also a Republican, a great proponent of raising wages for the working people in the state. They both signed minimum wage bills, but Chris Sununu would not.
So that's a good segue to the year that we are in, 2026. This Wednesday, I believe, this bill, HB House Bill 1484, will be introduced, and we'll begin is that correct?
Yeah, this
Okay.
year.
And we'll begin a process. So
Mm-hmm.
let's begin with this. For folks who probably have not seen the bill yet, which is most people, talk a little bit. So it's a very simple bill,
Mm-hmm.
and it establishes, I think that's an important distinction to make. It does not increase the state minimum wage. There is none. We default to the federal. I believe there are 20 states that currently do not have a state level minimum wage, and thus they all default to $7.25 an hour. But we are, I think this is accurate, the most expensive state in the country that does not have its own minimum wage. Most of the states that are part of that 20 include Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama. It includes, these are generally some of the lowest cost, poorest states in the country. They're also politically the most ruby red. I was looking at this list. There are some out in the reddest parts of the Mountain West and Big Sky country, like Idaho, I believe Montana, New Hampshire, and I think Pennsylvania is the only other state remotely northeastern in description that also does this no state minimum wage, default to the 725. So we'll get to the other states in a moment, but maybe it establishes one, and then over a period of years, it would gradually increase that minimum wage. Can you talk a little bit about those gradations, and the thought process behind that?
Sure. The bill that I put in is basically modeled on Bernie Sanders' current Raise the Wage Act in the Senate, and it goes up to $17 an hour. But the first bump was much lower. The average starting wage in New Hampshire is like around $11 or $12. So I thought, well, if we go in with an $8 or $9 immediate increase, that would be really insulting. And anybody that's making less than 11 or $12 an hour is got to be suffering. I mean, it's just not worth it for them to go to work. But that is the average. So it means that there are some people making less than $12 an hour.
Oh, sure.
Well, I started with $12 an hour, which would be in September of 2026, which would be, within a couple months after the end of the legislative system. And then it would go to 14th a year from now on January 1st, 2027, and then to 1550 January 1st, 2028, and 17 on January 1st, 2029, which would then put it at the same level as the federal rates, the Wage Act. And I didn't do anything with the tipped wage, which is now $3.27 an hour. Chris Schultz was putting in a separate bill to get rid of the tipped wage. But one of the big players that has been keeping the minimum wage when we got it through the House and Senate, Arnie Alpert bought a box of pens that said raise the wage. Every day we would send in a minister or a young person or me or some activist with this pen, and we would give it to his receptionist. There was a pen that said raise the wage. So I'm sure Chris Sununu will never have to buy another pen again. But at the same time, both at when we were looking at the state, the National Restaurant Association and the state level, New Hampshire Lodging and Restaurant Association, both have extremely powerful lobbies, and they were beating a path to the door of the governor, of Senator Hassan and Senator Shaheen, to keep them from raising the minimum wage. And in fact, we ended up passing a bill that says even if they raise the minimum wage, if we had a statute that said it would the tipped wage is half of the minimum wage, that it would keep the tipped wage at $3.27 an hour, regardless of what the federal minimum wage was. So, and this goes back to the 999 guy, whose name I can never remember.
Herman Cain.
Herman Cain, who was the head of the National Restaurant Association, or as Jackie Sill used to call them, the other NRA. And he, was instrumental in keeping the federal tipped wage extremely low. And so, these folks, and, it's when you think about it, if you're working in a steakhouse and you're bringing, a $60 meal to the table, you're going to get a much higher tip than if you're bringing somebody a $10 sandwich. Because it's based on the price of the food, not on the amount of work you're doing. And so that person delivering you that sandwich, you're just as hungry as the person buying the steak. So that person who's giving you that service is going to get paid much less than someone in the steakhouse. And the other thing is that people, the restaurant association comes in, well, our waitresses are making $200-300 a night. Well, if you're working on a Saturday night at a steakhouse, then that might be true. But if you're, think about it, are there Friendlies anymore? Are there Blake's anymore? Are there these small lunch counters where you used to go in and get a sandwich and a cup of coffee? It's all counter service now. They're paying people behind the counter $15 an hour, and then, and you get a number and they might bring you a sandwich, but it's not tipped anymore, because at that level, you can't find anybody to work for you if you're going to do it based on tips. Who'd be crazy enough to do that?
It's a good point. My daughters are in college. One just graduated a few weeks ago. And so for the last many years, they have been a part of this segment of the economy you've just described. One I find fascinating. They both hustle. And they're similar in age. They're both women, same region. We live on the seacoast in New Hampshire. One has primarily worked at a couple of different morning places. So coffee, those coffee drinks, bagels, stuff like that. The other one, bartending, and has worked at bars or restaurants that serve alcohol. And one of the things that always struck me with my friends in the restaurant business is so much of the profit and the base of pay from which tips are determined are alcohol, and that if you are working the bar or you're serving dinners that include $8 pints of beer and $14 mixed drinks or that sort of thing, the tips that my one daughter comes home with doing the same work or certainly the same amount of effort. Both of them come home with tired legs and sore backs. Both of them have amazingly generous people and jerks that they have to deal with as part of the service industry. There's no difference there. The difference in the amount of money they're taking home, and they're both making, often a similar base wage. And so the difference in how much money they're bringing home is virtually entirely because one of them involves alcohol and one doesn't. It seems like an awfully unusual way to determine the compensation. And by the way, and I'll say it, I think one of the most eye-opening studies I've ever seen from I believe it was Cornell University, which has arguably the most highly regarded hospitality industry program in America, and they did a study where they had a group of men and women, college age people from the school, that would go door to door in the same neighborhoods, asking for money for an unimpeachable cause, like hurricane relief.
Right.
And what they did is they had headshots and full body shots of the 100 students who were part of the study sent to a completely different part of the country to have them evaluated on a 1 to 10 scale purely by the appearance of the 100 participants in the study. 50 men, 50 women. Then they didn't tell the participants what the rating was, right? They said, go do your work. They all went and did the work. And here's what they found. Whether a man or a woman answered the door actually didn't really matter when they did the door to door asking for money. What mattered was the appearance. If it was a male, the appearance didn't affect the amount of money they raised. A male that was seen as a 3 versus a 7 versus a 10 raised about the same amount of money. Woman, the difference between a woman that was rated a 5, 8, double fundraising. Not because of their skill in the doors they knocked on. It was because of the physical appearance. And it was a shocking study that got a lot of attention. And again, these are all variables that have nothing to do with the work.
That's right.
And yet it's dramatically impacting the amount of money that people are able to take home from an honest day's work. This seems like a pretty odd way to ask people to make a living.
Yeah, but it is. And, and the other thing is that with the law says that if you go in and nobody comes in, so you're working at the local lunch counter and the roads are a sheet of ice, so there are no truck drivers coming in who need coffee. The employer is required to pay you up to the minimum wage, because if you're not going to make it in tips. So if the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, that's, you come in for 2 hours, that's how much you get paid. If the minimum wage was $17 an hour and you went in for those 2 hours, you would get paid at least $17 for those 2 hours. In fact, I'm on the labor committee, and we had someone come in with a bill to try to get rid of that requirement, that if you come into work and there's no work, like you show up at your place of work and you can't work because there's a burst pipe or there's no work or the materials didn't come in, then your employer is required to pay you for $2 just for the fact that you showed up to work.
2 hours?
Yeah, for 2 hours. And so they're, at whatever the regular wage is. For tipped workers, that's $7.25. But but they were trying to get rid of that. And it's interesting to be on this committee because Mark McKenzie, who was the head of the AFL-CIO for many years, is on our committee now. And he has this encyclopedic knowledge of the history of labor law in the state.
I bet he does.
I was involved in that commission back in the day. So he can tell us, who the people were that were involved. A lot of times it was like that particular bill came forward from a Republican.
Huh. Well, it does seem like that there is this segment, and it's interesting to see how President Trump is trying to tap into a blue collar element of the electorate that at one point was as firmly in the Democratic camp as you could possibly imagine, and has been, at best for Democrats, wobbly, if not evacuating the Democratic Party. And yet it seems like a lot of the Trump policy, the way to get and try to keep blue collar America into this new MAGA coalition is not so much economic policy, but more cultural dog whistle
Demagoguery, I think, is the word you're looking for.
demagoguery, and not really on things that are highly bread and butter, practical, um, and I don't know how long that can last. Right? Cultural is very important in a lot of ways. A family member of mine who was a Democrat and has now voted for Trump 3 times. This is not in my immediate household, but a loved one who's a family member of mine. I asked this person, look, you're blue collar, you're retired, didn't have a high school degree, made a living, got into the middle class. Why are you going this way? And some of these policies are definitely not in your economic self interest. It seems.
Right.
And the person said to me, respectfully, that's important, but there's something that you're missing, and that your party, Steve, is missing too often. That is even more important. The most base feeling is the feeling of belonging and identity. And he says your party too often now, and he used to be a member of it. Your party makes me feel like that somebody like me, because I don't have the degree, all the fancy degrees. I'm just a working class straight white guy who's just trying to make it happen and provide for my family. Your party makes me feel like I'm less than because I don't have credentials, and that's very powerful. That right? I mean, how that's a very powerful argument that is not an economic argument. It's based on respect and identity or perception of a disrespect. That it makes it you don't even get to talk about the minimum wage
Yeah.
if you're kind of working on that. By the way, I see somebody asks, "Are you allowing questions in the chat?" Absolutely, questions and comments. By the way, if you've hopped on, my friend Kathy Staub, veteran state rep from Manchester, veteran, you've achieved this status. And Kathy has been working in advocacy and in the legislature for a long time, advocating in many ways, and in this case, in this context, for working people, and has is the lead sponsor of a bill, HB 1484, to establish and gradually increase a minimum wage at the state level for the state of New Hampshire. So, for those of you joining in, Kathy, I'm very pleased as my guest today. So, yes, we're taking questions as well. So,
Yeah.
politically, here we go. Republican majority. Kind of touched on it a few different times in the hour so far. How do you make progress in trying to get this bill, or one very much like it, over the finish line?
Yeah, I'm a little older than you. I'm 68. So, I grew up at a time when, the people who worked in the mills, like my parents, were called the backbone of America. They were the people who actually built the economy. And we had a whole society that was dedicated, like, my parents grew up during the Depression, and, and they both lost a parent at a young age, so they never really made it into the middle class. But there was still this feeling that, if you know my father had a GI loan, so we had a two-family house, and we used the money income from the other apartment to help pay the mortgage. And when my father passed away, the mortgage was taken care of because it was a GI loan. We had public transportation, and colleges that were not, you didn't have to, mortgage take out a loan that you were going to be paying for the rest of your life, for the privilege of having a job. And
Yes.
so, so I'm middle class. I've lived a very good middle class life, but, I still I'm still that kid from I live like 5 blocks from where I grew up. So I'm still a Ward 5 person.
Yes.
And I still have a lot of respect for the people who actually do the work. The people who are unloading the trucks at Walmart, the people who are stocking the shelves and running the cash registers. I have a lot more respect for them than I do of the 3 members of the Walton family who are now worth $500 billion for being born to Sam Walton, who actually did build the business. And I think, the trick is, so it really bothers me. There's those blocks you do what they say about us, what we say about them.
Yes.
This idea that Democrats don't care about working people, because I am a Democrat and I am in there fighting for working people all the time against Republicans who are trying to make it easier to evict people, who don't want to raise the wage. So really, I mean, it's not, it's what they say about us. It's not who we are. It's not who we are, and the fact that people like me have made it into the middle class makes us elitists, apparently, which I find hilarious. You have no idea how hard it is for me to not be swearing.
I appreciate your
I'm
restraint.
still, even though I have a college education, I'm still pretty rough around the edges, and I just, it's kind of funny to me. But anyway, um, and Connecticut was one of the last states that raised their minimum wage, and this is how this was during the Big Fight for 15, which was sponsored by the SEIU, and the way they did it, and it was tumultuous. The night that they actually got the bill passed through the Senate, I believe, went into the wee hours of the morning, like 3 a.m. There were still legislators standing up there, trying to persuade people to vote to raise the minimum wage. And the gallery was filled with low-wage workers who worked at fast food restaurants, who were not kids, trying to make ends meet. They were the people that you run into at lunchtime. So, like, if you walk into a McDonald's at lunchtime, it's not a high school student, or it shouldn't be a high school student that waits on you. It's an adult. It's someone who, has bills to pay and kids to feed. And so they built a gallery with those people. Hundreds of them would show up every week. And the other thing they did in Connecticut was that they elected Ned Lamont as governor, who is a Democrat.
Right. Right.
And good old Ned Lamont, I mean, it's nice that he was there for that. It also would have been nice if he had been in the Senate when they passed the Affordable Care Act and we ended up with a public option, which Joe Lieberman blocked. But I mean,
that's right. Lamont was he ran against Lieberman in that Senate reelect, correct?
right. Yeah. And he beat him in the primary, but then Lieberman ran as an independent, and he was the one who blocked the public option in the Affordable Care Act. But Ned's, stuck with it and was still out there trying to do good things for working people. And they were able to raise the minimum wage. And right now they have the highest minimum wage in New England I have my numbers here, $16.94 an hour.
Okay.
So they're the highest. And, if you look around, and Rhode Island just went to 16. And then right in our immediate neighborhood, Vermont is $14.42 an hour because they have a cost of living increase that goes in every year.
Yep.
And Massachusetts is still at 15. I'll get to that in a second. But Maine is at $15.10 an hour. And they were able to raise their minimum wage because they had Paula Page as governor. They did it with a ballot initiative. And if we had ballot initiatives in New Hampshire, we would not have a $7.25 an hour minimum wage. In fact, the Raise Up New Hampshire group worked with the National Employment Law Project, and we did a public policy PPP poll, and 79% of people at that time, which was I think during the first bill, which went up to 12, were in favor of raising the minimum wage. And I think because wages went up right in that COVID period, people have kind of lost interest. But I think there's renewed interest now because prices are just going up, and wages are no longer keeping pace.
I agree with you, too. You mentioned this earlier. There are so many downstream effects in the present day to COVID. And it's this unusual combination, I think. You got a dramatic increase at the time of COVID of voiced appreciation of people in the service sector
Mhm.
because they were getting out there when a lot of us were able to stay home and avoid the risks of getting sick. And I think since there was that combined with this informal advocacy saying tip your coffee, tip your barista better. Um, if your local coffee shop doesn't offer a tip jar, give say, hey, I want that. That there was this advocacy, and then as COVID went away, you feel like the love sort of dissipated, but
Mhm.
it was not replaced by increased or intensity about the predicament many folks in those positions. So the love went down, but it
Mhm.
was not lead to a rise in interest on this topic. It's not one that we hear a whole lot about at the state or federal level these days, I don't think.
Yeah, and one of the things that happened, because I go door to door and I talk to people, and I go into the three deckers and I walk up the stairs inside and knock on the door, and I talked to this woman who was said, I make good money, I make $20 an hour. She said, but um, her landlady decided she was going to ratchet up the rent like something like 280 or $300 a month, and this was I live in Ward 5, so this was not a luxury apartment, and she was saying that she was going to get a job with DoorDash or whatever. And this was and this was after because during COVID, there was the eviction moratorium, and people were provided with aid if they couldn't make their rent because they weren't working. And she said, this woman that I talked to said that her landlady raised the rent because she wanted to get that COVID money. I mean, it's not as bad as buying your wife a Ferrari, but I mean, it's still the same
Yeah,
thing. And I always say,
yeah.
like, well, if Republicans are for it, they must have a business plan for snatching up all the money. That's kind of cynical, but I might not be wrong.
So, but now going back, so it's roughly, and of course, with the 400 member legislature, the actual number of people that show up on a given day always varies. So we're looking at something like 228 to 172, something like that. So it's a meaningful majority, and the Republicans generally seem in this second year now of the 2 year cycle, they seem to be pretty cohesive. They stick together on most of the bills that matter, and so with this, do you get the sense that most Democrats at the legislative level are broadly supportive? Maybe there's details, and these things often get amended and so forth, but generally are supportive of the concept. And then on the Republican side, do you see any number of Republicans who maybe are genuine in reflecting that blue collar ethos that we described earlier, that maybe can cobble together something that approaches a majority on this for a given vote?
Well, I still haven't been around for a very long time, but I will say that when we lost by only 5 votes, there were Republicans who voted with us.
Yeah.
They were from places like Claremont, Derry, Bob Elliott, the guy from Salem. He was a reverend who had studied at BU with Martin Luther King. Um, he, I always enjoyed him. I mean, I was not in the House. I was in a gallery, in the peanut gallery, being an activist, but I always appreciated him. And he is someone who appreciated, working people who are trying to make ends meet. And, Salem is a community that, and interestingly, um, I was canvassing in Salem some years ago, and got to talking to this woman. She was bringing in her groceries. That's because it was a garden apartment, a complex, and you couldn't really talk to people, but she was outside, so I was able to talk to her. And she worked at a Burger King, I think, and she said, "No, I asked, I had asked her, where she worked and stuff, and she said she worked at Burger King." I said, "Oh, here in Salem?" She said, "No." She said, "I can't afford to work in New Hampshire." So she would like drive, mile and a half down the road to
Go over the
Massachusetts,
border.
where the minimum wage was already like $10, $11 an hour, and she would only be getting paid like $8 an hour if she worked at the in Salem. And that, yeah, she said, I cannot, and that's still true. I mean, um, I was, looking, for example, right in 2022, they did a study. It says my internet connection is unstable. I hope you can still hear me.
I do. I can.
Yeah. So was right at that point, we have a deficit of 45,964 people more who commute out of state for work than commute in. And when you
Mm,
think about it, like the bulk of our workforce is, less than like 45 minutes away from a state that where the minimum wage is twice what it is in New Hampshire, like Maine. If you're living in Dover, why not go to Berwick? If you're living in Salem, why not go to Methuen or cross the Tyngsboro Bridge? Or if you're living in the Upper Valley, why would you take a job in Lebanon at the Burger King when you can just go across the bridge and be guaranteed, to make at least $14.42 an hour? I think that also had, the Republicans like to talk about the free market, but I think that pressure from outside the state where people could get much higher wages also had an impact on wages in New Hampshire because it's physically we're a very small state. I mean, it doesn't help the people up in Co-op County who really don't have any other choices
right.
and who are really struggling and losing population because of those reasons. But that's another thing too. It's not. They're always talking about the free market. Well, I think that the government, I'm a firm believer in the government of the people, by the people, for the people, and not just the Walmarts and the Walton family and the Bezos family, but the family that lives across the street from me. We really, we are the society, we are the people, and I think the whole idea of the government that was created as a democracy was to have um, a government that lifted society, that had an economy that improved the quality of life for individual people and groups of people living in here, and not just to create wealth for a few people at the top. I mean, they tried that in Europe. They called it feudalism, uh, and I don't think that I don't want to be a serf. I don't want anybody in my neighborhood. But people are feeling like that. I mean, the term landlord comes from feudalism,
Right.
and a lot of the incentives that we have now in our housing market are not to build houses like your dad did for families, to raise kids. They're to build, luxury 300-unit apartment buildings. People need to touch grass. It's nice to have a yard where your dog can run around and roll in the grass, or your kids can play frisbee, or so but raising the minimum wage is one tool that we have, and it's one tool that I'm willing to wield because I'm not, you know, I'm just one person, and I'm not extremely powerful, and I'm not, I'm not a real go-getter.
Well, look, I think what you said a moment ago, this to me is positive power, uniquely large legislature is there's a lot. Look, I think there's a lot of potential drawbacks to having 400-person volunteer, $100 a year volunteer legislature. There's this thought process that an argument that the best thing about having a 400 member is that the voters must have a far more intimate relationship with their state reps than they would in a state that has a fraction of the size legislature. And there are examples where that's certainly true. But I would say that when you have a 400 member legislature and you have, I think, 10 state reps from Derry, and it's something like 9 or 10 from Salem. Yeah, there aren't a lot of people out there, even those that are regular voters, who could tell you who their seventh favorite state rep candidate is. I mean, it's almost a punchline of a joke, and people in both parties know it when they're in the business of having to recruit and fill seats. This is really hard, and even plugged in folks at that level. But the positive opportunity is that people with different backgrounds There's no silver bullet answer to dealing with the large and growing income and wealth inequality in the country. There's not a silver bullet. It's a ton of silver BBs. And if individual legislators or small groups of them, like in this case, good co-sponsors, fantastic people who are getting together and say, I'm not suggesting an increase in the minimum wage is going to solve all the problems.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other people I know in House leadership that are talking about specific pieces, silver BBs that can help with housing, and some that could reverse some of the most egregious tax policy of the last few years, specifically to make affordability a higher priority for those folks, particularly in the bottom half of the income and wealth distribution of the state. Like, if there are many opportunities to create these silver babies that together can make a real difference in a small state like New Hampshire. But that is the positive power of a 400-member legislature, because no one person would have the time, and it's a volunteer job, as it is. What you're doing is
Right.
is civic engagement in the classic sense. You're picking something you know a lot about, that you've done a lot with, that could make a really big difference, and you're gonna work on it. I think that, to me, that's the best of what we could hope the legislature would be. Now we got to go find roughly 201 or 200 other people, I suppose, more or less, who are willing to row in the same direction.
Right. Yeah, and get them elected. I mean, I'm in a ward that has one Democrat and one Republican. So every time I press the green button, she presses the red button. Every time I press the red button, she presses the green button. So, I mean.
Point. And Manchester, and I'm from Manchester, you're a Manchester. Manchester is a very important element of this puzzle of who will the majority 2027 in the House and the Senate, but particularly in this case in the House. So many seats on the line, almost 10% of the state's House seats are in Manchester.
Mm-hmm.
And it has some real dynamism. We have wards that are getting bluer and are kind of safe Democratic. We have some that used to be blue and are getting pretty purpley red. We have a number of them that split like yours between the two parties. It has become a battleground. The way we think of a lot of towns, suburban towns, as the battlegrounds, like the Bedfords, the Merrimacks, the Goffstowns, and these are, but just as those suburbs have been coming towards Democrats, some of these urban wards in Manchester, to some extent in Nashua, are moving towards Republican. And I think we have to provide a positive message to say, particularly to working class folks, we're working for you.
Right. And it's the way I got in was that I got a phone call. I came home from canvassing for somebody else, and my husband said that the chair of the city Democrats had called, and I was like, oh, he's just wants us to figure out how we're going to do this phone bank for this person who's running a writing campaign for Senate. And then I opened up Facebook, and somebody was writing, "Oh my God, we need somebody to run for state rep in Ward 5," because it was a couple, and the husband left town at the end of running. So it's like middle of September. So I get on the phone. I said, I guess I better call him back. So I did. I called him and I said, well, let me talk to my family. But it's hard to find people in a place like Ward 5. Because, it's working people. There's a lot of rental properties, so people are moving in and out, and they don't really have the time to become invested. It's a real challenge to find people to work at the polls. And then, and you have this other thing where, people like me are given, we need more young people. We shouldn't, they want to put us on an iceberg and float us out to sea. But
oh no,
we can't. And I said this a couple of times. I said we can't disqualify anyone based on their age. I mean, I don't expect to be doing this. We have 2 people who are 94 in the House, and that will not be me.
I'd say that's pretty tough. Impressive.
Yeah. It is
tough.
very impressive, and I'm impressed by both of them. But that, and they're always there. They always show up and they're always in their seat for, for every vote. But,
Very impressive.
but so it is a challenge to find people who are able to do the work and to come, go to the State House, go to the committee meetings and be there for every vote. And to take the time to go around and talk to people. People say, "Oh, you should go around and ask people to vote for you." I'm like, no, that's not what I do. I'm going around talking to people so that when comes time for me to press that red button or that green button, I know who it is that I'm voting for and what it is that they need from me and from the government of the state of New Hampshire. And I'm representing the interests of the people that live in this ward, which, includes, this is a majority minority ward. And I have a new alderman as of a few hours ago. Jason Bonilla is my new alderman.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Latino guy.
Yeah.
And I'm very excited about that because he has a lot of energy and we have a lot of potholes. So
you need that energy for those potholes.
Yeah.
Well, he is definitely a high energy guy. That's exciting.
Yeah, it is. It's very exciting. I'm very pleased. And so, I think my phone's running out of juice here, but I got a little while left.
Well, you know what? And we're approaching 1:00, and I tell folks, I'm like, they have lunch. But first of all, real quick, how can people learn more? And if they want to participate, how would you direct them to help in the cause?
Well, Raise Up New Hampshire has a Facebook page, and also following the State House Watch will give you that information. I'm on the Labor Committee. I received a note from the chair of my committee, and it says that my bill will likely be heard on the 3rd of February. If you can come, like I said, it was all those Fight for 15 workers who came to the state. It's hard to come to the State House during the day. So if you can't come on the 3rd and to testify or to just show support, you can, since COVID, they allow you to post testimony online. And also you can email the members of the Labor Committee saying that you support raising the minimum wage, write letters to the editor, share the stuff that is posted on the Raise Up New Hampshire site on your Facebook page. We just put out our annual, these are the minimum wages for every other state in New England, and New Hampshire is still $7.25. As like 20,000 people have seen that right now. So 20,000 people have been reminded that we only have a $7.25 an hour minimum wage, which is, the poverty level would be a wage of $7.24 an hour. I don't know. What a coincidence, right?
What a coincidence.
Yeah. So, there are ways. Writing letters to the editor, calling your representatives and just saying, this is ridiculous. People need more money in their pocket because prices are going up, and people are going to get hit with those new healthcare bills. They're at the federal level, they're getting rid of the subsidies, and at the state level, we're now going to start charging people for Medicaid. People are going to need more money, and the prices are not going to go down. Unless we have a severe recession, rent's not.
It's a good point. It's a good point.
People who bought these houses for income, as income properties, paid through the nose for them. And then they have these big mortgages with these high interest rates on top of it. If they don't get that amount of money for rent, they're going to lose their building. So they're going to keep trying to, to keep that, otherwise, the bottom's going to fall out of the market, which has, certainly happened before, but
it has happened. And you're right. The hope is disinflation, the slowing down of the increase in prices. A lot of politicians, frankly, on both sides of the aisle, will promise what is effectively deflation, which is prices will go down. But as you note, that really only happens in terms of an economy-wide dynamic when really negative economic forces, a deep recession, a depression, we don't find widespread deflation unless bad things are generally happening. So the best we are generally hoping for is disinflation, which is an important distinction. And as you say, that doesn't help if you're making $7.25 an hour. Disinflation is not helping you much at all.
yeah. Stabilize
So I'm going to put,
costs
yeah.
and raise wages so that they
You know,
meet.
so I'm going to put some of this information in the notes on the podcast. We'll record this. We'll put it up. So as a couple of reminders, you can read about. We'll be also following this on my Substack, stevemarchand.com. The Politics of New Hampshire is what it's called. We'll be following this throughout the winter and spring. I can't wait for spring. Months away. And then also we record this and edit it a little, clean it up, and put it as a podcast. You'll be able to get that the Steve Marchand podcast on Spotify. You can get it at Apple Podcast, and I also put the video up on my YouTube channel. So subscribe to any of those. Subscribing to all of those is free, and that means that whenever new content goes up, you'll automatically be alerted to it, so you don't have to go hunt it down. And we will put this up shortly, and you'll be able to listen or watch on those various platforms. So I want to thank my friend and my guest, Kathy Staub, for all the work you're doing. Thank you again, Kathy, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for letting me come on here and talk about my obsession with the minimum wage.
Well, you're doing God's work, and thank you again. It's a labor of love, and we hope that we'll be successful in 26 and beyond. This is a big election year. This is a really important issue for people that really need legislators to come through for them, and this is one way they can do that. So I want to thank you all again for watching or listening, and stay tuned. We will have more programming in the days to come. There's a lot going on. It's an election year, endless content, hopefully boundless energy as we move forward in 2026. Thanks again, Kathy, and thank you all for watching and listening. We will see you all very soon.
All right, thank you.